some very special guests today. I know Nicole and I have been, waiting for this interview and this discussion. And so without further ado, I would love for Scott and Nasiah for you to introduce yourself, tell who are you, and just tell us all the amazing things, that you're doing, and we're just really excited. So Nasiah, I'll hand it over to you if you'd like to introduce yourself, and
Oh, well,
let's
thank
start
you.
there.
Thank you, Farah. Again, my name is Nasiah Cirincione-Ulezi. I am a board certified behavior analyst, but only recently. It's actually something Scott and I have in common. We are both newer BCBAs. However, I have been a behavior analyst in the field of disability services for nearly more than 30 years. So I work primarily out of Illinois. I've been a special ed teacher, a frontline, working with adults with disabilities. I've been an administrator, professor, and today I'm happily joined with Scott Herbst in this work with our a relatively new founded business. We started off a few years ago as Pivot to Inclusion. Today we're Inquiry Inc., and we'll get into all that later. But we have been in business together now for nearly 4 years. It's one of the things I love around my work. And I'm also an administrator for a pretty large online university. And that's it. I'm sure more will come up. More will come
Yeah,
up as we talk. I'll kick it over to my business partner, Scott Herbst.
Yeah, thank you. Really great. Thanks for having us, Farah and Nicole.
absolutely.
And what Nasiah didn't mention is she's the CEO of Inquiry Inc. And then I'm Scott Herbst, and in this role, I gave myself the title Chief of Programming. I really love designing workshops and educational programs. So that title was available and I took it. And my passion, I think what I want to say is that I've got this business, another business, and my passion really is that people communicate and communicate in a way that really fulfills on what matters to them in a way that builds relationship. Uh I think it's possible that anyone can get along, and they just need to learn how to do it and communicate in a way that does that. And that's what has me lit up and excited about this work we're doing.
That's awesome. Us too. I mean, my life is completely changed from meeting you guys. So it really is amazing. And I'm just so excited to have some more conversations today. It's just exciting. So I'm Farah, as you guys know, and this is Nicole. And we always have our little tagline. Actually, Nicole, I don't think we did it last time.
We didn't.
We didn't. It's kind of sad. We always go, is this on? Is this on? Because the first couple of times we literally were trying to get it to work and it was live. So it's kind of our little tag fun line because we like to have fun here. So yeah, I would love to start with how we met. I think that's kind of really interesting and was a very, I would say, traumatic time for the world, the country, myself, and kind of how I stumbled upon, I think it was Scott first, right? It was Scott, I think, first. Yeah.
Yeah.
So if I remember right, it was right after the weekend of July 4th, I believe, because I remember I was up north in Wisconsin. We go up north for times, and I believe I was up there and had gotten a message from a staff member. I don't remember exactly how it rolled out, but I remember that it was pretty traumatic because well, when did George Floyd, when was the date of that? Was
I
that
don't
week?
remember the exact date, but it was in late May, I want to say.
Late May. Okay.
Yeah.
So that was, when the country and the worlds and everything kind of completely pivoted and changed, and everybody knows, what happened with that. July 4th weekend, I remember I was, like I said, up north, and there was some posts, it was media, that were posted by one of our staff, and then another staff had responded to that post, and had gotten really upset. I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was a shared post, from, I believe, it was a political post that was shared, and this staff had gotten upset and had immediately said, is this how you, run your business? And it was, again, it was a very politically run, and the comments that she had made. So I don't remember exactly how I ran. Do you remember, Scott? Did I respond to something that you had posted? Because that was when we were all on.
I think how you found us, I'm not sure, but at that time, Nasiah and we can talk about how we met, but it hosted a couple of online events.
I think that is what it was.
And I think maybe I had followed up with a survey we put out at the end of the event where you had requested a conversation or something.
I think you're
I think
right.
that's what happened.
Mhm.
Yes, because we were all kind of in lockdown still, right? I think it
Yeah.
was all
Yeah.
like, yeah.
Yeah.
So I had responded to that and asked for a conversation. And then, yeah, you guys I think I was your first person, right? Wasn't I, or one of the first?
Farah, you and
Yeah.
your team have the honor of being the first. And just to confirm, we had done an event and you reached out to Scott after that. I remember the phone call. It was, I remember Scott right after he said, Nasiah, I just talked to Farah, and you can get in contact with her, and I remember this. I have a memory like an elephant most of the time. He said, Nasiah, she's a great listener. That's what he said. I might have
Did
been
you say that?
he said that, and from there, but I remember it was after an event that we had. You reached out to Scott, and the rest is history.
It really is, because I was a mess. I didn't know what to do because I just have come, it's just 4 years, it's nuts. But tell me about, okay, I'd love to hear about that time, because how did you form? Because you guys were you had a different name then. Why did you choose that name? Why did you change it? And like, I'm curious to hear kind of that time period. Like, how did that happen?
Scott, I'll kick this over to you. You tell the story clearer than I do, and then I'll supplement. It's a powerful story. So why
Yeah.
don't you kick us off, Scott?
So we actually met a couple years before George Floyd was killed through a state professional association. And I was the president, and I met Nasiah and just thought she was amazing and wanted her to get involved. Um, so Nasiah started participating, and then, after a couple years of networking, it was just natural that she would be elected to the board. So she was, and had just started her term in March. I mean, it was like a week before the pandemic. I think he came on the board, and all of a sudden, so it was kind of a wild time to come on the board, because we were like, what do we do? And had no history for this. And you're the new person. I've actually am, for the first time, thinking now what that must have been like for you, Nasiah. Um, but but then so then, so we're focused on how do we get our membership through the pandemic and support them. And then George Floyd is killed, and almost immediately organizations started, it felt releasing kind of panic statements about diversity, and saying things that I mean, I was, as the president, I was like, how do you get a statement out this fast? We have like, our board has to approve it. And, um, but then also kind of crazy things like we're going to work with police departments and law enforcement. And I'm sitting here thinking, we're trying to figure out how we're going to host an online conference next
Right.
year. And we're all volunteers and we're not going to do that. And also, if you just look at our field, it's not like we are representative of, I would say, broadly representative of the demographics. Like I remember the first ABAI conference I went to, I was like, oh my God, everyone here is white. It's improved some since then, but it's still not there. And so I was thinking that we're part of this, we're talking about systemic racism, and we've clearly got our own issues that we're not, however, for whatever reason, an open environment for everyone. And so I called Nasiah to say, hey, what are we gonna do? Nasiah had already started doing some pretty amazing work around a DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion committee. And we just started having a conversation about the state of our field and then the state of the world. And it became pretty clear pretty quickly that the conversation was bigger than just, this professional association. And also we were saying some pretty raw things that, like, things that I think that I wouldn't, I'd be embarrassed to admit now, like my own racist thinking, right, that I don't like about myself but still have, and shared some of that with her. And this would have been in thoughts like, I think I can't share that, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
Nasiah was a space that like opened up for that.
Mhm.
And then I think Nasiah, you can correct me, but you probably said some things you might have not said to a middle-aged white guy. And um and we're having this pretty raw conversation and brought us together. We weren't getting farther apart in this conversation. And um and so then where we went from there was, well, let's have this conversation publicly and see what happens. If
Oh,
this is bringing us closer together, maybe having it publicly would make something available for other people. And so we did that. The first one, we really barely let anyone else talk. I think we talked for almost an hour and then let people share for maybe 10 minutes, but it was pretty carefully managed. And that went pretty well. So the second one, we talked less and let participants talk more. And then the third one, we created some sort of workshop, and I don't really remember it, but some sort of workshop where people broke into groups and dialogued with each other. And we barely talked at all for that one. And it was really driven by the group. And I think that's where, and by that one, I think, Farrell, we had met you. And then there was one other group that had said, we're interested in talking to you. And so then we started the business, and we started it as Pivot, honestly.
right.
I think mostly because we needed a name.
Okay.
And so we went through this process of like inclusion, this and that, and somehow put it all together. That name emerged, and I think it sounded catchy, but we really didn't honestly know what we were doing. And in so many ways, like we hadn't worked together, we'd been on the board together, but this was very different work than managing a state association. And also, so didn't know how we would work together, but also didn't really have a methodology. And I really do want Nasiah to share a little bit about the journey since then and how we became Inquiry.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Scott, for sharing that. And I will say, I think going back, I probably would have had that conversation with the middle-aged white man. That I would have done that. What was different is having it public. And
Mm,
I do invite people, because that conversation, that first one is on YouTube, it's available. I do invite people to watch it. And Scott, now thinking about it, I think we should make some time to go back and watch it for the purpose of having people like understand that humans evolve, change, grow. And I think going back to listen to that conversation to see what we've evolved into is just such a powerful demonstration of human potential.
mm.
So thank you for bringing that up. And I would like to share what led to the name change. I think Pivot to Inclusion was definitely a name constituted in the direction we wanted to go. There was direction there. As we started to work, probably 2 years in, what I started to feel, and I confirmed it with Scott because he shared the sentiment, was that we're certainly, our work includes equity, it includes addressing diversity and inclusion, but there is a broader intention there. There's something bigger there. And what we started talking about was this human experience. And at the time, I was doing some reading around human dignity, and I said, that's it. That is the work that we are doing. We're centered on human dignity, which certainly includes equity, diversity, and inclusion, but it's broader than that. It includes speaking to the human existence, what it means to be a human being, and all of the things that we experience in these physical human bodies. So in conversation, what we landed on was we're about asking questions, right? We're about coming from a place of curiosity, not knowing, because if we come from that place of knowing, we stop asking the questions. And our minds got together and we locked in on inquiry. And truly, I don't think there's a better word that can capture what it is that we are doing. We are engaging and facilitating engagement with others around staying in the process of questioning, of curiosity, of reflection, to keep going. Because, and I'm doing some work now around of the reflective learning cycle. That's what it is. It's the going away and coming back and doing it again. And in order to really learn, because none of us are ever a finished product, right? It does take continuous engagement with the questions, the big questions of life.
Well, Nicole, I'm thinking of curiosity because you're like, that's me. Like that's like Nicole's whole like aura. I would say she constantly is like, I'm always curious. I want, Nicole, I'd be curious to hear because you knew Scott or of Scott, or can you tell of that kind of history? Because it really becomes a very full circle so much. I can't even believe it, even as I listen to this, like how much I think Nasiah and Scott, you had said in a prior conversation too, like the universe kept pushing you together. It just felt like, and that's how I feel because there isn't really another place like Sonnenberg that I've ever met that is constantly trying to, I don't know, I don't know how you would describe us, but we're constantly trying to learn and just grow and like, well, how can we do this? And how do we communicate and how, and I don't really know anyone else that's like that. I feel like we're very different that way. And everything you just described is what I'm constantly trying to move forward. And our team is, right? Would you agree with that? And then Nicole, I would love to hear about you too, with your background with, ACT and all of that, because total full circle. So I don't know who wants to talk first, but it's very exciting.
I agree with it, but I really want to hear from Nicole.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. Curiosity is like my number one value, so I appreciate remembering that. Um, I got into ACT. I went to an ACT boot camp, 5 years ago or so. And it changed my life. And I definitely am somebody who practices what they preach. And so I use ACT in every area of my life to the point where it kind of has like become me in a way. And so I definitely identify with that. And therefore, um, yeah, I mean, you two are famous in our field, and lots of research and lots of content, that has really helped me, grow in both like my education and my personal life. So I just appreciate all the work that you've done, and presented in the field. It means a lot to me. And because of ACT is kind of how I kind of found Scott and started doing, some of his trainings and things of that nature, that I have really benefited from and take that into my own practice. It's like, ACT to me is like yoga. You know how they say it's like, it's your practice, because you're always practicing it. And so that's how I feel about that. Which I can't wait to get into how ACT and NVC are related, because to me they're the same kind of realm.
So I'm curious, Nicole, because I mean, I remember when you took the boot camp. I don't remember the exact year, but I remember the time period and how you went away and then you came back and just what you said about it and how it just changed you completely. What was Scott involved in that area, or that was after, right?
I don't think you were at that one. It was the Fort Lauderdale one. I think we talked about it. Yeah, he wasn't at that one.
Okay.
But there was a lot of other individuals that played a role in that conference, and in general, like putting out research like about ACT and putting out books and other areas.
Okay.
Yeah. So from that conference, I kind of just took everything I could about the topic,
Okay.
and did additional trainings and research and all of those areas. Yeah. If I wasn't so passionate about adult care, I would have done my dissertation on ACT, but I did not. Um, yeah.
Yeah, it's just really cool. Yeah, so thank you for sharing that, because Nasiah, back to what you guys were saying, is like that just really is the embodiment of what I'm constantly chasing, is the question. Like, I remember when we all met, and started talking, and I just had so many questions, and I'm like, and what I appreciated about our conversations is we were like learning together, and we're constantly learning together. And I would say something, and Nasiah, we had a lot of side conversations about lots of stuff, and I would say, I'm really bothered by this, and I would give you a scenario or something my child ran into, and you're like, gosh, that's really a good question, or that's really a good perspective, or I don't know, we would just talk, and I would cry sometimes because I was just so like wrapped up in, and Scott, I think about what you just said about like racial, like I forget how you just said it, but like my own self of like my own thinking that I was so caught up on being called something that was what I perceived as negative or racial or racist, and the that safe space was really created from you, both of you, and it was just what I needed. It was like therapy, like Nicole, when you talk about acting, it was very much like I couldn't say something wrong. I couldn't say something, it was just what it was, and that was so appreciated because it really created a connection, and I didn't feel like I was a bad person in that scenario, which I really felt like a bad person for a long time based off of an action that had happened, which is what brought me to you guys. But I think that's what I love about you guys is just that safe space, and that's what we're constantly trying to create is a space where people communicate and we can have these conversations that can be very tough. And they still can be very tough. So anyway, I don't know, Nasiah, if you wanna,
Yeah.
I don't know. what you
I'll
have to
just
say about that.
I'll just supplement because I'm certainly aligned with everything you have just said. And I'll add this is the experience was a co-creation. One of the things that Scott and I think I can speak for you, Scott, is one of the things that we love about the work is that we are contributed to, that it's not us going in, pouring in, it's bi-directional, as that we are contributed to and we're in partnership with the organizations that we serve. And it is very much a co-created experience, which is what I love. I remember our conversations, but I certainly feel, and we all meet pretty regularly, I feel like that most times that we all get together and meet that I have been contributed to in the context of our work together. So I'm grateful.
Me too, for sure. And I just I'll say year now, because it's been 4 years, is just I look back and I'm like, I just can't believe how different I just think about everything and just my life. And I can't even imagine moving forward what that looks like. Every year it's just very, and more questions, I mean, we're always like,
Yeah.
okay, now I have all these questions, and then my kids and staff and friends, and just the way you have conversations now are so different. And even my husband, because he has his own, mind, of course, and his own questions. And he came home because they went down to Kentucky this last 4 days, and they had some and that would have been a very like a deal breaker of friendships, of conversations, if this would have been 4 years ago. And just to sit down, because I don't think anyone would have known how to maneuver through that. And he's like, it's just so cool because I literally said to one of my great friends, I'm gonna love you no matter what. Like, this is great. We just can have conversations about whatever, because here we are in another very pretty crazy year that's happening here, right? And so just the perspective taking and the just the learning and the whys. And at the end of the conversation, it was, if I wrote down our values, they're all the same. They're all there. They all align. It's just how we get to different places and how we see it. And it's just so cool because it really shows how we all have grown, by, again, having these conversations, right? So
Absolutely.
So yeah, so I just thank you. I'm just always so thankful for our time every week. I mean, we've spent a lot of time in the last, 2 or 3 months for sure. And then we've met, every other week for years, with some breaks here and there. But I mean, I don't know. And Nicole, how long have you been meeting with us? Like 2 years has it been every other week? Or when did you start coming on to those meetings? Been a few years, right?
Yeah,
Been 3 years ish,
at least two. Yeah.
at least two, yeah. And what those meetings kind of started out with and how that's evolved, was, and I don't remember exactly when it changed, but with the DEI, and we were talking about calling those meetings, like a DEI meeting in our team, and then that kind of changed over time. I mean, we still kind of do, but like, because of the humanity piece, right? Like, that's where I remember it shifted at some point. I actually remember where I was sitting, what I was doing when we were having this conversation. And I don't know, Nasiah, do you want to talk a little bit, and Scott, about that piece? Did that change? I guess I just would love to know a little bit about that.
Yeah. yeah, for me, it
Yeah.
was one of the values that Scott and I read pretty much regularly, at least before we have any sort of major operational meeting, includes and Scott, maybe you can speak it verbatim for me if you could pull it up, but it's about kind of saying what needs to be said, even when we're scared. That is a value that we both really believe in. And I think in the space of DEI, what I started feeling was the way I started relating to the words, this experience of diversity, equity, and inclusion wasn't truly capturing what my values were. It felt very discrete, like it had an endpoint. And through a multitude of conversations, what I really believed is that the work we were doing was broader. It included equity, diversity, and inclusion, but that wasn't it. It was broader. And when you really get into the work of values and valuing, you start paying attention to the words that are being used. And what I believed is that the message, the DEI message, was a part of what it is we do, but it wasn't all. And I've said this to Scott on multiple occasions, that when any organization attends to diversity, equity, and inclusion, it truly is just best practice. It's just best practices. So I know for myself that um, I felt it. I felt that the work of equity and inclusion was important, and we do that work, but what we started to do around communication was bigger. It just encompassed something more. And I saw the work starting to shift. What I would see happening is it's almost like, okay, let's bring this back to equity, diversity, and inclusion. Well, that's going to be included in everything. And when we started to really center on human dignity, I think the space got bigger for me, and Scott can share his own thoughts, but it got bigger for me as what was possible in this work. I know later on we're going to talk about what we're going to do next, because I certainly have some thoughts, but the space for me got bigger when the intention got broader. I felt that our conversations changed. And that's also right around the time when we started talking. We always had the conversation of values. We started talking about reflection and the life after that. And then from reflection, the compassionate communication, and that is taking on a life of its own. So us really, really honoring our values of saying what needs to be said, of growing. Also, one of our values is growing as individuals, as a team, and as a business. I think all of our values, but particularly those two, really had us organized in a way that we could have this really co-created experience of growth. Because I do feel, for sure, I'm not the same human being I was almost 4 years ago when we started this work together. And I've seen each of us evolve, change, and grow.
For sure. Ditto.
And Scott, I would love to hear your thoughts.
I got a little bit hooked by one thing you said, and I just wanted to add a clarification I think you'll align with, is that you said focusing on DEI is organizational best practice. And what I just want to clarify is that there's different ways of approaching that. This is something we do in addition to And that's where I think it veers towards, let's make sure we're checking the right boxes, we're doing the right things, that we would say in our languages in the world of don't screw up. And that's one way to do it, and there's probably some value in that. However, what we take is a more restorative approach, like you're gonna screw up, because I mean, you're just always gonna screw up. And even if you don't try, something's gonna, like, your roof's gonna fall in like yours did.
Yeah.
Right. And it's gonna give you something to
did.
deal with. And guess what? When the roof falls in, people are gonna get irritated with each other. And then that's where it really tests the limit. So I think it's that restorative. How do we build communication? How do we really operate in service of our values with integrity? That is the best practice. That and other than that, that was just the one thing I wanted to underline and leave listeners with.
For sure, I align with that, for sure.
And that's why, and that was personally why I was so drawn to what we were doing, because there was no right or wrong, or when there was a wrong, so to speak, it was not wrong. It was, okay, so let's talk about that. Why? And then also, I didn't want the piece of paper that corporations were passing around that everybody read, or the video that they looked through for an hour and they signed off that they, saw the video, and now we're all good, right? Because I watched that video and now I'm good to go. Like, I'm whatever that was. I think for a white female it was, okay, so I'm not racist. I watched that video. Like, that's how it felt. It's like,
Yeah.
we're good, and that didn't feel good. It felt phony,
Yeah.
or whatever. So it was more of the daily, goes on, and this is not something that you sign a piece of paper on. So that's what I was looking for. So I thought that was great. So back to, what is different? What's the same about ACT versus NVC? What I would love to hear what you guys have to say about that piece.
Okay, I'll start. Certainly for me, the biggest overlap in the two is the with component. Is compassionate communication or nonviolent communication and ACT, which certainly we can do those, we can engage in both those technologies solo, but there's a powerful with component that gives us access to connection with other human beings. So when you think about the technology of ACT, and Scott, I know you're going to share your thoughts too, but when you think about that technology, what's most salient and powerful for me is the way I can use that technology as a clinician, right? As a clinician and as a consultant to connect with other human beings. Why? Because I'm getting present to myself. We first understand and become connected to others by first addressing ourselves. So I think and with compassionate or nonviolent communication, that's it. It's a technology, a communication technology that keeps us connected when we feel like we want to disconnect. It keeps us in community and in conversation with each other. So that's where the overlap is for me, is with the togetherness of it.
Love that.
I like that. And I was just thinking that it's almost like nonviolent communication it's almost like ACT together. I think Nasiah just said this. I'm going to say it a little bit differently, but it's like well, I mean, you don't have to use it for conflict. You could use it for deciding where to have dinner. And where it becomes really, really helpful is when there's some kind of disagreement, conflict, problem solving to be done. and it's almost like using ACT practices just live in vivo in communication. Like there's a big part of nonviolent communication is identifying what happened, and what happened when you said this, and then identifying my feelings. And there's like some awareness going on there about, oh, you wait, hold on, you didn't cause me to feel this way, you said something and I felt this way. And so maybe there's some so then there's some awareness going on. There's connecting to values. If you talk about values like needs, we actually train it a little bit bigger than to talk about just needs. We actually talk about needs, intention, commitment as this general thing that might be motivating communication. And then, like Nasiah said, the withness of it. So if one thing that I think really works for Nasiah and I is that we're both fairly fluent, always not like experts. We're still learning, but we've got enough training that, if we really disagree with something about business, then one of us is always there to start using the practice, and it really works. I'm getting a little off the question, but I think I mostly see it the same way as Nasiah, and appreciate the ACT components I can see that are done together.
Yeah.
Like in dialogue. It's like doing ACT in dialogue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One thing, Scott, you said earlier today around ACT and NVC is and I think you just said it here too, is that present moment awareness component.
Yeah.
One thing that's been incredibly powerful in my life with NVC is that observation without evaluation, which I think lends itself to like present moment, what actually happened. And that's a part of ACT 2, that technology of like being rooted here and now is definitely changed my life, right? In that there's an awareness of when I'm not here right now, present. And so no, I just wanted to add that because it's been so powerful for me.
That's definitely been so powerful for me, is how much judgment and how much thoughts and extra stuff we put into everything.
Yeah.
I mean, there's just so much we could talk about with that, because it's just mind blowing how much I've learned in 4 years, and I know I have still so much to learn, and it's just, I think that's what's so, again, what I love about this, because and what I really love working with you guys is just, it's just, you practice what you preach, Nicole. I'm just going to say what you had said before, because you use it, and that sometimes it's really hard, because your feelings bubble up and it takes over for a minute. You got to kind of pause or take a break or and you can just talk about it, and I love that. Nicole, I know that you were ACT first, then MVC. So I'm curious too, do you have anything to add with what they had said about the difference between ACT and MVC, or the overlaps? Or you kind of did say that you feel like they're the same thing, but do you see any differences in
I
that?
mean, I like hearing it's ACT and dialogue because I can connect with that. Where you have like the present moment awareness is definitely there. Like diffusing some of like your thoughts to what is like reality. It's all kind of intertwined. The acceptance of like yourself, acceptance of other people is that connection piece that we're all trying to achieve with both areas of communication.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's just so great. I love it. All right, well, I think that's super helpful, because that was something I really wanted to kind of hear from everybody. So, and Scott and Nasiah, so thank you. One of the things, I know we only have about 15 minutes left, so I'm gonna try to hit two big points. so we just got through with an 8-week training. We had kind of a big ramp up to figure out what exactly we wanted that training to look like for Sonnenberg. Based off of kind of everything we've been talking about in this podcast. And so we've gone through the training. We finished last week, and we did communication. We call them gyms. So we're all practicing and learning, and then we have homework through the week, and then we'd come back and we'd go through scenarios. What I'm curious about is after going through like this formal training that we have, that we now have on recordings, and we're going to train staff and do different things. What do you think the next steps are for after you do something that's more formal? Because it's 8 weeks, but there's so much more, of course, as we know. So I would love to hear from Nasiah and Scott about what your thoughts are on that.
I have so many thoughts, and I don't want to monopolize these last few minutes, but I'm going to share quickly. So Scott and I are a strength-based company, right? We are always centered on what our clients' strengths are, and we can identify those. And clearly, one of the greatest strengths, a few of the greatest strengths of Sonnenberg are your outstanding leadership, but leadership constituted in relationships. I love the centrality of relationships at Sonnenberg. I love the attention to communication, also constituted in relationships and always forward thinking. So my thought, and Scott and I haven't talked a lot about this, but my thought is to capitalize on that to continue to develop leadership in these areas. So it is all about capacity building. And another thought that I would love to do is take some of your practices a step further, particularly the reflection, into reflective supervision, to embed that within the organization. And there's levels, like all of the things that we've trained, integrity, communication, reflection, all of it is the word that Scott and I use are, it's a mountain with no top. We just keep going deeper. And with reflection, there's more to it. And you have touched on it in a couple of our meetings, Farah, when you start talking about learning histories and how we interact with each other. Word I'm going to use is attunement, right? It's not a word that's used in behavior analytic literature, but it is used in allied profession, how professionals come together and regulate each other. It's a very important skill to develop. We come together. If I'm in a bad mood and I'm your supervisor, guess what? If I don't know how to attune, then my supervisee is gonna attune to my bad mood. And all of a sudden we have a contagion in the organization. And I've seen it. I've seen great leaders, because they weren't aware of how their employees or how their supervisees are attuning to them, just not aware of it. All of a sudden, a stressed leader has a stressed organization. So I'm very much looking forward to, at some point, engaging in that work around attunement within the organization. Because again, your strengths, I think attunement works in so many different directions. You're a highly relational organization, and all of that can become a contagion and be just generalized and populated throughout different spaces. So that's my thought, and I'm curious about yours, Scott.
I think building fluency and building fluency in a way that allows for flexibility. So I'm thinking about all the work that an athlete will do to be able to respond to what's going on in the court, right? And that's, I think, a big part of the practice. So it's kind of like you've got a lot of the basic strokes of like the fundamentals, and now it's how how do you do it? Yeah, more flexibly. I don't know how else to say it. I'm thinking about all my analogies are sports analogies. So I'm thinking about when I learned to snowboard and I took a lesson and they gave me some really basic things. And then there was to go out and practice, and it was very different
Yeah.
using those things going down a blue run versus so like a an intermediate level run versus where the lesson was on a green run. And there was a lot of like getting good at the green runs so that you could then adjust and move. And I never took it to where I could really do jumps or anything, but probably someone who's interested in developing these skills can just keep we say it's a mountain with no top. And can always go somewhere. That's
Yeah.
my thoughts on that.
No, I think that's good. It's like almost like generalizing to all the different environments, all the different, you know, stimuli, people, invite, everything that we kind of do, going back into more ABA talk, but
Yeah.
um,
And in a way that really though honors the work, in
yeah,
the sense that some of the skills we teach could become really rote and dead in a way, where it's just like we're just going through the motions. We're just going through the motions, but learning to apply them in a way that keeps them fresh and alive.
and
So that
authentic.
you,
That's the
yeah,
word.
like you, so that you really
Yeah.
are, when you're having a conversation, a tough conversation with someone, that you really are connected with your values and you're inspired and they're inspired. And even though it's difficult, that we know we're headed somewhere and that somewhere matters to us and it's worth being in this conversation for.
For sure. Yeah, I would, that's the thing. I mean, I think to keep going is the feeling, is that motivation and that feeling connected, and it just being real and
Yeah.
authentic, because that's what, when people think you're doing it rotely and that you really don't care and you're going through the motions, we're done. Who wants to be around that? So, okay, thank you. I know we don't have a ton of time, so I would love to hear kind of where you guys are going and what your future is. And I'd love to just hear about, yeah, that, I would say. Who wants to take it?
I'll start off. Oh boy, we have some great possibilities for the future. And certainly, Scott, you can expand on this, but in the future, there will be a conference. There will be retreats. There will be opportunities for people to come and learn as leaders under the methodologies that Scott and I have developed over the past 4 years. So there is so much. And I'm so excited about what's coming in the future. And Scott, what do you want to add to that?
One thing I'm excited about is we are wrapping up work on online modules that will allow us to focus our facilitation time less on delivering content and more on coaching from content that people have been able to watch on their own, and also offer organizations a little more flexibility in terms of, maybe they don't want the full package, but they would like to try to do it themselves. And that would give them a basis for doing that. And I'm really excited about the conference. The thing I want to add to that is the opportunity to bring organizations together where people can start learning from each other. And I think that's a big next step for us, is that it's less like this spoke where we're at the center and we're working with that organization and more of a web where
Oh,
and a network that is really exciting. And yeah, we're both excited. Yeah.
when you say conference, what can you tell us what you mean by that?
Yeah, the conference where there will be presentations, there will be opportunities for folks to come and receive information, but also contribute information. So whatever Scott and I do, we definitely try to be about it, right? So not
Yeah.
just talk about it, but to be about it. And we believe in bidirectionality. So a space, if you will, a gathering where we are giving and receiving information that, creates a space for all of us to be liberated and to move forward.
So but do you have things that are already, that you can talk about, like dates and times, or
Oh,
that's just
no.
something? Okay, that's what I meant. Okay.
Not yet. It's
Okay.
forthcoming. You will be the first to know, though.
All right. I better.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're going to present, by the way, or lead a workshop or something. Yes,
Yeah.
you and your team. Absolutely.
That's super exciting. I mean, I'm just so, yeah, I'm excited to take what we've already done and see how that unrolls now that we'll be, you know what I mean, taking that
Yes.
content and moving forward with it. So it's fun to hear kind of what you are thinking about next steps too, because I'm always thinking like next step, how do we do this? And we've already, I know Nicole, and we've had side conversations and full conversations of like, okay, so what are we doing next? Because we're always thinking about the future. So that was
Forward
cool.
thinking.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, what else? We only have a few minutes. Is there anything else that you guys want to say, or I don't know.
Just thank you so much for the opportunity, both
Yeah.
working with your company and being on this podcast today. It has been so valuable for us, as valuable for us as it is for you, I'm sure.
Yeah. So I second that. I'm completely aligned with that. Just thank you. Thank you for every conversation, for every meeting. We appreciate it.
Yeah. I mean, I wish I could have recorded every conversation, because I would have loved to listen back and go, whoa.
Yeah.
See, there's lots of forward momentum, and just,
Yep.
yeah. So yeah, thank you. And hopefully we'll have more in the future, because
Absolutely.
yeah, I'm very excited. But okay, so thank you, and we'll see everybody next time.
Awesome. Thank you. Bye-bye.